All right. Well, welcome back to Two Beards and a Bible. I am John Swaino, and this is
Dave Tenney.
and we are here to look into the scriptures here this evening, and we're looking at the beginning of Christ's miracle, the first miracle recorded in the scriptures. But the beginning of Christ's ministry is kind of what we're going to be talking about here for most of this evening. And for the first miracle, we're going to turn to John chapter 2, starting at verse 1. We're going to read 11 verses there, and Dave is going to ever so eloquently read those verses for us.
Well, now you've set me up to fail. It says, on the third day, there was a wedding in Cana of Galilee, and the mother of Jesus was there. Now both Jesus and his disciples were invited to the wedding. And when they ran out of wine, the mother of Jesus said to him, "They have no wine." And Jesus said to her, "Woman, what does your concern have to do with me? My hour has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Whatever he says to you, do it." Now there were set 6 water pots of stone, according to the manner of purification of the Jews, containing 20 or 30 gallons apiece. Jesus said to them, "Fill the water pots with water." And they filled them to the brim. And he said to them, "Draw some out now and take it to the master of the feast." And they took it. And when the master of the feast had tasted the water that was made wine, he did not know where it came from. But the servants who had drawn the water knew. The master of the feast called the bridegroom, and he said to him, "Every man at the beginning sets out good wine, and when the guests have well drunk, then the inferior. You have kept the good wine until now." This beginning of signs Jesus did in Cana of Galilee, and manifested his glory, and his disciples believed in him. And after this he went down to Capernaum, he, his mother, his brothers, and his disciples, and they did not stay there many days.
Okay. So as we look into that, and we kind of take in what we've read there, what stands out to you?
Well, I think this is the thing that, I think there was a Johnny Cash song, "He Turned the Water into Wine."
Oh,
Right? That's like what I always think of. I grew up listening to a lot of that kind of music, but yeah, I think about the miracle, and this is really the first miracle, I don't know if it's the first miracle, but it's the first recorded miracle of Jesus that we have recorded here.
I don't know if it's worth mentioning or not, but it's something that always comes to my mind. Is it doesn't seem as though Jesus set out to go to this wedding and then perform this miracle.
Right.
Because his mom asks him to fix this situation that they're in.
You ever get roped into doing something by your mom or your dad?
Right, yeah. Or my wife, yeah.
Or your wife,
Absolutely.
Yeah, that happens.
And but one of the things that strikes me is that Jesus listened to his mom.
He did.
That might not have been the first thing on his mind. It might not have been something that he went into this situation planning on doing, but he listened to his mom.
Yeah.
And there's a lesson in that. And when we've read in times past, in some of the previous leading up to this episodes that we've done, we've talked about that statement that Mary kept these things in her heart.
Yes.
Well, now she's kind of she told the people there, whatever he says, do it.
Right.
She came to understand.
So now we get into the more interesting part of this is the subject of drinking or alcohol in the Bible.
Right.
And this is an interesting thing to talk about. I don't see anywhere in the Bible where it says that alcohol is forbidden. And, Timothy was told in 1 Timothy, Paul tells Timothy, to use a little wine for your stomach's sake. Mm-hmm. And I imagine maybe that was alcoholic. I don't really know. But I think there we see the proper use of wine. It was used as alcohol was used for medicinal purposes.
Mm-hmm. And even today, we use it for disinfection.
Absolutely.
And during this current time of during COVID that we're currently hopefully coming out of, we've been told to, spray things down with alcohol and, use alcohol wipes and so on. So it has its uses.
Typically back then, I know that they the typical consumption of wine was mixed with water. Mm-hmm. Whether that was new wine or alcoholic wine, the Bible doesn't distinguish between those things.
And the reasoning behind that, I've heard, is that the water supply, they didn't have a municipal water supply like we do, or even the ability to have clean, fresh water everywhere. So, if you're getting water out of a stream, you have to treat it.
And alcohol would be a way to treat it.
It would kill the whatever little microorganisms are in there. And when I was in Boy Scouts, we pumped water out of a stream when we were hiking in New Mexico, and we had to treat it with iodine tablets, which tasted horrible. And we pumped it through a charcoal filter to help that. But you can't just drink water out of the stream, and or at least not with the way our gut health is these days. We'd certainly have issues.
Certainly, a lot of people would turn to this if this is a problem. Is sometimes when we have something we're doing and we want to justify it. So let's say we like to drink, and so we say, "Oh well, Jesus turned the water into wine." That's going to be my justification for that. What do you say about that, John? Is that a proper justification?
What I'm trying to think of the saying that a text without context is just a pretext. Did I say that right?
Yes.
And but in the context of things, there's when you look at the usage of alcohol in the scriptures, there's some things that we can't we're not comparing apples to apples, because in the olden days, in the Bible times, we didn't have the fermentation practices that we do here today. It was all by natural fermentation, and I'm not well versed on percentages of alcohol content, but I'm pretty sure most off-the-shelf wines these days are about 14% alcohol by volume.
Probably.
Somewhere in there. And I think at the uppermost regions of naturally sourced wine, the fermentation doesn't go over like 7%.
That would probably be about right.
And so we're talking about something that is half as powerful. And then, as you said, they cut it with water because they were using it for a purpose. They weren't using it to...
Typically 10 to 1.
Right.
So,
yeah. And when we think of the letters to Timothy, when we talk about like an elder or a deacon, and they're told not to be given to much wine.
Right. A little's okay then, right?
And see, that's where people take that and take that out of context. And one of the things that when I taught driver training, that I would always bring up to my students is that there are scientific studies that can be found and cited that say that alcohol has an effect on the human body from the very first sip. So you're not you may not be drunk after a couple of sips. You might not be quote unquote what we call a drunk. In our normal vernacular, but even in a couple of servings of alcohol. But there's an effect on our body. And as far as it pertains to driving, your reflexes start to slow, your inhibitions start to go away. And I always think about that statement, that or the statements in the scriptures that say that we are to be sober-minded, that we are not to let anything control us. And when you put something in your body, when you put an alcohol or some substance in your body some way, somehow, that takes away the control of your mind from your body and the things that you might do, then you put yourself in a very dangerous situation. So yeah, instead of looking for a reason to say, well, I can drink a little bit of wine, and thinking about, in the context of things, why were they drinking wine? They weren't drinking the wine to be drunk.
Yeah, I mean, there is no doubt that drunkenness is condemned. And when we talk about Jesus turning the water into wine, my thought is I doubt it was alcoholic wine. And here's my reasoning. He says that these water pots of stone here in verse 6, he says they contain 20 to 30 gallons apiece. So let's say let's split the difference. It's 25 gallons. So Jesus just made 150 gallons of booze, right? Now, how could Jesus teach, drunkenness is a sin, but here's 150 gallons of booze, which would be what maybe, so how many bottles of wine are in a gallon? Maybe 3? I don't really know. 3 times 150, so that's 450 bottles of wine.
Yeah.
I just don't, that doesn't add up. That doesn't make sense to me.
And it doesn't make sense. And that's where when you apply common sense to the scriptures and you put things in the proper context, you see the true picture rather than picking and choosing.
The second thing I'll point out, and John and I keep harping out about context. This miracle isn't a text that's teaching about wine. This is showing that Jesus has control over all physical element, or this physical element of water on this earth. He can control physical things, matter. He has control over it. That's what this is about.
Right.
This was a miracle.
Right. And we do have it, for our learning, and we can extrapolate from that, that and think about the way that the character of Christ and the things that he would do, and we can say that in looking at that word wine, that he wasn't making what commonly people think about here today. Yeah. But the other thing that I want to throw in here is that if you really want to, we're not going to get into it because it would be far too boring for you to listen to at this point in time, but it's worth the study. It's worth the effort to look into the different definitions of the words used for wine in the scriptures. And if you really start to parse those out in the Koine Greek, as we talked about in a previous episode, that there's little doubt left that they're talking about alcoholic wine. Yes. That they're talking about grape juice, the unfermented fruit of the vine. Yeah. And there are, I won't try to say the words because I'll mess them up from memory, but they're, the words that are used for wine are very, very clear, very concise. And there is a word for the alcoholic wine, and in fact, the stuff that they gave Jesus on the cross that he spit out of his mouth was a fermented vinegar product, vinegar type of wine. And so the Bible doesn't contradict itself. When we use the word wine, and the translators, when they translated it, it's a very general use of the word, and our English language just doesn't come close to the language that the scriptures were written in. So the translators did the best they can, but thank the Lord that he gave us the knowledge and the ability to study and to show ourselves approved and to look into the context of the scriptures.
Some might go to verse 10, and so where it says, "And he said to him, every man at the beginning sets out the good wine,
right? And
when the guests have well drunk." It doesn't say when the guests are well drunk,
right?
It just says when the guests have, and I think this takes to if you've ever eaten a meal, the more as you go through the meal, your stuff isn't as bright as it was when you first had it.
Right.
I could think of that definitely with like pop. And I love pop. I don't have it very often, but a lot of times one of the things that my wife and the kids and I like to do is we go to this pizza place here, and it's actually close here where John lives, and we get a pizza and a pitcher of pop and we play cards. And I know by the end of the night, the pop just doesn't taste as good as when I first had it. And I think that's kind of what he's talking about here.
And there's also the the good wine in the context of what was customary at a wedding like this. The good wine was generally a fresher wine that hadn't sat in the wineskins as long, that didn't have the time to ferment. And the process of fermentation kind of makes things taste bad. It's an acquired taste. It's not.
Especially today, if you were making wine, you wouldn't say, "Okay, here's the way we're going to do it. We're going to get some goat skins, and we're going to pour this in there and tie it up, and then let it sit for 6 months. And boy, that's going to be something good."
Right.
No, it's not. Right. But it's going to be something that's drinkable that you're not going to get sick on. Right. But it may not be the best thing you ever want to drink.
Right.
So, well, where are we going to move from here, Mr. John?
Well, as we're looking here, we talked about his mother being the one that encouraged him to do this, to fix this situation. It really is a show of her faith.
Yes.
And we know that he had a love and a respect for his mother, that that he went ahead and did this thing. So we pretty well covered that first miracle and the things that really stand out in that first miracle. Well, let's move on to John 2, a little further in John 2, and pick up at verse 13 and read there. And this is another account that many people have probably heard of. So if we go to chapter 2 there in John, starting at verse 13, and we're going to read through verse 25, through the end of the chapter. Now the Passover of the Jews was at hand, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem, and he found the temple, in the temple, those who sold oxen and sheep and doves, and the money changers doing business. When he had made a whip of cords, he drove them all out of the temple with the sheep and oxen, and poured out the changers' money, and overturned the tables. And he said to those who sold doves, "Take these things away. Do not make my Father's house a house of merchandise." Then his disciples remembered that it was written, "Zeal for your house has eaten me up." So the Jews answered and said to him, "What sign do you show to us, since you do these things?" Jesus answered and said to them, "Destroy this temple, and in 3 days I will raise it up." Then the Jews said, "It has taken 46 years to build this temple, and will you raise it up in 3 days?" But he was speaking of the temple of his body. Therefore, when he had risen from the dead, his disciples remembered that he had said this to them, and they believed the scriptures and the word which Jesus had said. Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover during the feast, many believed in his name, and when they saw the signs which he did. But Jesus did not commit himself to them, because he knew all men, and had no need that anyone should testify of man, for he knew what was in man.
Lots of interesting things here.
Yeah.
There's actually some hilarious things in here. One actually pretty funny thing, but we'll get to that. I always said, the Bible is not necessarily a book of humor, but there's some funny things in the Bible.
When you study it, when you look into it, and come to understand, you start to get a feeling for the personality of those. And Jesus used irony in
a lot
in his speech, and there's definitely some things that you we're raised, I guess, in this country to think of the Bible as just a boring, dry thing to read,
and it's not at all.
It's not. Once you get into it and you start to study, I found myself today as I was studying. Found myself chuckling about the situation with the Pharisees, and we'll get to that if not today, on another day. But I found myself chuckling at some of the things that were said, some of the things that were done, because it really does. Times haven't changed.
No, they haven't. So here Jesus goes into the temple, and what does he find in there?
People buying and selling, and
now, are they allowed to do that?
No,
they're not. And right. In fact, it wasn't that people weren't allowed to buy and sell and exchange money, because you got all these people coming in. It's not that what they were doing was wrong. It's where they were doing it.
Right.
And God had some pretty strict rules about what was to go on in the temple.
Right.
And
And to fast forward to today, he still does.
Yeah.
When we think of the church as we come together, there are things that are to be done and things that are not to be done.
Right.
And
yeah, the mind of God has never changed.
Right.
People forget that. They think that, oh, the God of the Old Testament was some different God than the God of the New Testament. No, it's the exact same God.
Right.
He said, Paul said that those scriptures were for our learning. Mm-hmm. There's the one thing we can learn by studying the Old Testament is the character of God.
Yeah. Kind of a don't do these things again.
Yeah. And one thing also we can't forget is when we're reading the Gospels and this account of Jesus, that we're still talking about the old law. Mm-hmm. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John still cover a time period that was before the kingdom, before Jesus was crucified, before the beginning of the New Testament. So we got to remember, we got to look at the things that we're studying kind of in an Old Testament light.
Right.
Right now, temple worship, is not a thing.
Right.
But at this time it was.
Right. And now when Jesus saw these things, what did he do? He flipped the tables over.
He did. And here's the funny part. This is the funny part here. In verse 18, it says the Pharisees came to him and it says the Jews answered and said to him, "What sign do you show us?" Now listen, Jesus is a one man. He walks into the temple, which is huge. He drives all the people, totally reorganized the temple by himself. What sign did he do to show? I mean, come on, man. Who else could have done that? You think anybody could have just walked in there and drove out all of them people and all those animals and flipped over all those tables and gotten away with it?
Right. Somebody would have stopped him.
Yeah.
And it kind of, you can infer from that Christ was probably a fairly intense individual when he wanted to be. Well, probably at all times.
Yeah.
I'm sure living on this earth, knowing what he had to do, he was intensely seeking out the will of the Father. And that's, the reason for the overturning of the tables and so on. People look at that and I've heard it said before, well, Jesus was so angry, he lost his cool and he drove these people out and whipped them.
Oh no, he was totally in control.
Right. And that's the thing where I think we get muddied up in our minds nowadays when we speak of anger and so on, or when we read something like this, we kind of read into it, how we might be feeling in the situation or whatever. And there's a difference between anger and wrath and
zeal
and a godly disgust for the things that are happening.
Yeah.
There's a difference, and there's a difference between sternness, in kind of a teaching moment, because I'm sure people learned something that day, and being viciously mean. If he had whips and cords and he was truly angry, it stands to reason that he could have done some damage. He could have done some harm to people. Yeah. But we don't read that he did that.
No, he just, one commentator said he reorganized the temple.
There you go.
That was the sign.
Right.
In there, Jesus answered him and he says, destroy this temple in 3 days and I will raise it up. Is he talking about that temple?
Yeah, no.
No, he's not.
But again, as happens over and over again in these accounts, when Jesus talks to people and talks to the people of things to come, they can't get their mind out of the present, out of human, out of where we are. I mean, we would be the same way in many respects.
That's why Jews said, hey, this place took 46 years to build. They thought he was talking about that temple. Jesus was talking about his body.
Right.
Right. That's why he says he was speaking of his body.
And there's, again, that played out, and the disciples that heard that remembered that when his body raised up after 3 days.
Yeah, because they certainly didn't understand it either.
Right.
In fact, as we get towards the end of this study, another 4 or 5 months,
right.
You'll see that when Jesus is about to to basically go to the trial and suffer all these horrible things, his disciples are going, well, Lord, at this time, will you restore the kingdom?
Right.
They didn't understand it at all.
Right.
You know, that's as we go through, as I say, we've got to keep it in mind that this is still the old law. When we study the Gospels, you got to study it as it's being revealed.
Right.
So,
absolutely. Well, I think we're looking at the time where we've talked long enough for now. So let's wind this up. We didn't get too far there, but that's how that goes. Hopefully, you find this to have been an edifying thing to watch and to listen to. And we will part from you now, and Lord willing, we'll see you again. Until next time.